A quick response to Everett's vlog regarding what is rationality. I'd argue that rationality and reasonable and logical, probably interchangeable words. They're all interdependent. I don't think you can have a rational point or proposition without it having components of reason and logic. I just don't think that's possible. I don't think you can be illogical and still be rational in what you're saying. So rationality, I think, is dependent on those things. Well, anyway, so they might be interchangeable. As for a definition, I think it's easier to look at it as another one of those examples where I think the white space around the concept, the opposite space, defines it. So I think rationality is basically anything that's not irrational. And I think that's an easier way to look at it anyway, in terms of trying to define what it's dependent on. I mean, we know that self-contradiction is unreasonable, irrational, illogical. We know ignorance is destructive to rationality, or at least destructive to logic, and willful ignorance especially. And you can't really have a component of ignorance in your logic. I mean, if you know something's wrong and then you argue it nonetheless, use it as evidence, you're basically being irrational. So I guess, to me, like I said, I don't know if there's any other concepts: self-contradiction, illogic, and ignorance. I mean, we all know what ignorance is, and I guess that's what disqualifies an opinion, is elements of ignorance. So it may be rational for somebody to believe, let's say, in UFOs, but it's only rational if they've been willfully ignorant of the physics, and the speed of light and the limitations on any spacecraft ever being able to propel itself through all this material in the universe and survive at those kind of speeds, because the dynamics of mass and force are going to mean that these would be explosive impacts if anything did attempt traveling that fast. So anyway, so one could argue that they may be rational, but they're only rational from their ignorant perspective. But I think there is a common understanding of what is reasonably known. So in some cases, I think the irrationality is absolute, in the sense that it's known fact to like everyone, that a certain fact is fact. Like the moon isn't made out of cheese. So somebody might be ignorant and capable of postulating that maybe the moon is made out of cheese because they don't know we landed on the moon and we know what it's made out of. But that ignorance would be so grotesque that it would be an irrational argument for somebody to make, just because they'd have no standing to make it. So that would be part of the irrationality, I think, would be an unqualified arrogance or an unqualified authority. So anybody who's expressing an opinion as if it has credibility, when they themselves are incredible in terms of their knowledge of the subject, then in my opinion that could qualify as irrational, even though from their perspective, from their ignorance, the logic might be acceptable in that it isn't self-contradictory, but it is so willfully ignorant it still has to be qualified as irrational from an objective point of view, from an objective standard, or from a qualified standard, or an absolute standard, or whatever the word we're going to use. But I mean, I guess, so in a sense there is two ways something can be irrational. Either it's irrational in that it's broken logic, or it's irrational in that the logic is broken by ignorance, that there can be no sensible thinking because the ignorance is so grotesque. So, enough said.